Something is pretending to be my friend. Part 4. First things first. Sorry I couldn't update sooner. Things somehow managed to get worse since the last update. I know some of you are worried for my safety, and you would be completely justified in your thinking, since this is the last time I will be able to reach the world. I want to take my time. Let me start where I left off. I sent the update and stood from the computer. I could hear raised voices out in the hallway beyond the door. I couldn't understand them, muffled as they were. Typing out what had happened had once again helped me come to grips with my situation, as wild as it was. I had to figure this thing out, or die. Pretty simple choice. I wasn't entirely sure if I could trust John at this point, even though he had every opportunity to take me out, if that was his plan, and still hadn't. I wasn't really sure on what the bigger picture was. How did John fit into this? I had been in an almost comatose state when he convinced me to send an update. What if that was a bad move? What if I was giving power to the evil instead of taking it away? I know I had too many questions and not enough answers. I could feel a rare moment of courage building as I thought through my situation. I snuck to the door and pressed my ear flat against it, trying to make out better what the argument was about. John was speaking sharply to a woman. Some things were still unclear through the thick door. I told you, if we want to, we need to do this. John sighed, almost as if he were resigning. Doesn't this make us just as bad? The woman's voice responded, before someone stomped away and slammed the door. I could hear heavy footsteps getting closer to the room I was in. Something about the way the woman spoke put me on high alert. I suddenly became very aware that there were no windows in the room. Great, I had been trapped by another bad guy. I frantically looked around the room for an escape. I had become a bit of a master at that over the past few days. There weren't any promising prospects. The room was pretty basic. Something caught my eye, and I formulated a plan. Albeit a stupid, crazy plan. Up to this point, I had been dealing with supernatural forces. It had hardened me. The fact that something I assumed was a human was putting me in this situation filled me with hatred. John was a big guy, but he fell hard when he came through the door and caught the corner of the heavy computer monitor on his temple. He was dazed but not out. I quickly jumped on top of him and slammed my hands repeatedly in his nose. Something inside had snapped. I could feel myself letting out a guttural growl as I continued to rain blows on John. I'll give credit where credit was due. John was pretty kick-ass. He was squirming under me and even managed to get a clawing hand to my throat before my final punch landed and he went soft and weak under me. As soon as that final hit fell, I remember the regret. It filled me deeply. I hated myself for doing this. I had started this summer job with so much joy and excitement. After only a few days, I had transformed into an animal. I'd nearly beaten a man twice my size to death with my bare hands. Fear can do incredible things to people. Still straddling John, I vomited to the side. This made me feel a bit better. I knew I had to keep my wits about me. I stood and looked out of the room and down the hallway each way. Apparently, the woman had gone far enough that she hadn't heard because she was nowhere to be seen. Next, I dragged John into the room, checking that he was still breathing, and closed the door behind us. I planned on getting my answers. When John came around, his hands were bound by his belt to the leg of the computer desk. It wasn't the most sturdy of tables, but he was in no shape to escape. I had found a long hunting knife on him and sat with my back against the door as he looked up at me. I thought it looked pretty intimidating, but instead of crying and apologizing, John started to laugh. So what's the plan? Kill the person who saved you? John coughed through the blood, still filling his mouth. I would need to learn some of this stoic bravery. It put me off and somehow had given him the upper hand. I told him I just wanted answers. The truth. I also told him I heard his wife, I was guessing at this point, and him arguing and knew he was up to something. That stopped his laughter. He grew solemn and seemed to shrink. "You know nothing about the evil here. It will end us all. I was trying to protect my family." John was barking through broken teeth. He seemed to be telling the truth. I closed my eyes and sighed deeply. I had been through too much to give up. I was still horrified at what was going on around me. I never expected to be in this situation. Now that I had accepted it, however, I knew what needed to be done. John was given a choice. He could tell me everything, or I would go find his wife, drag her back to this room, and slaughter her in front of him. The native man's eyes grew wide at my words. The flight option had been closed on me too many times. The fight option seemed to be the only one left. I felt like a monster, but I knew what I had to do. John started talking. I can't remember what he said word for word, but here's the gist of it. Several months ago, a man had gone missing from the reserve. Well, this was definitely cause for worry. It wasn't exactly unexpected. And oftentimes, John's people would be gone into it for days, camping or fishing. The occasional animal attack had happened throughout the years. Something about this man was different, though. After the man and the family had been missing for about a week, someone knocked on his door. When no one answered, they opened the door. The man's wife and daughter had been violently slain and mutilated. John wouldn't go into details, and left to rot in the house. This had caused a massive uproar in the community. The man had obviously murdered his wife and run off. The police were informed, and a search party was put out. They found the man's body about 20 miles away, in the middle of the forest. I guess that's why they didn't bother telling the local campers anything. Case closed, right? Obviously not. Anyway, fast forward a couple months, and the locals are whispering about monsters in the trees, saying that the murderer had cursed the land and brought a dark evil through his misdeeds. If you don't believe in the supernatural, it would sound like mumbo jumbo. But anyway, somehow 4 people convinced themselves that there was a way to deal with the problem, and they set out into the forest to cleanse the area where the murderer had died. John was one of those people. When they got out into the middle of the forest, it was dark. They couldn't see to do their work, so they set a fire. Through the trees comes a man, the murderer. He isn't hostile. In fact, it's opposite. He sits among them and whispers kind, loving words, moving from one to the next, a smile on his face too wide to be human. As he passes, each person is marked with an intricate wound on their arm. They all bled together except for John. The man told John that his work was important and that he needed someone to keep in touch with their human side so that they could aid his new master. Something about this man was soothing. As John sat in the room, telling me all of this, he cursed the evil, and I could tell he regretted his actions, but he also made it very clear that at this time, there was nothing he could do. Like some ulterior force was guiding him. One of the 4 new recruits whispered to the murderer that he would like to meet his new master. John described a tall, powerful shadow that came silently. It came to the edge of the campfire and watched them. It was hideous and beautiful to behold. One by one, the people fell and worshipped the being, dancing around the fire and offering it blood from their arms. The spell cast on them was binding. John guessed the ritual wasn't as effective on him because he did not participate in the marking. After the ritual, the shadow vanished as though it had never been there, and each person felt a sadness. They loved the power of the master and regretted that it had left them. The murderer spoke up and provided them instructions on how to spread the power of evil over the land. John was told simply that fear and followers would empower the being. He was then released to return to the reserve and keep an eye on the people. The others were dispersed amongst the forest. When Paul, the supervisor, had emailed John about possibly having the camp visit for their annual trip, he came up with the plan to involve the children. His idea was simple: capture a counselor and have them convert the children over time. If anyone grew suspicious of the activities around the camp, it would likely only garner more horror and thus grow the power of his master even more. John remembered David from the previous year. He was also easily able to find him thanks to Facebook. I grew hot in the face as David described how he had slowly introduced drugs to David through deception and manipulation, always staying in the shadows. He said it was almost too easy as he approached the boy, sleeping in his car in a shady Toronto parking lot. The shadow had taken joy in making a David-shaped monster. The murderer instructed John to let the boy die, slowly. John hesitated to agree, and the shadow grew, deep and dark and horrible. It let out a shriek. He knew that if he had failed his master, it would cost him everything. Now that the evil would have a steady supply of followers, John needed to create fear. He coaxed David into giving him his Facebook information through torture and messaged me from his account. Things went better than expected when I had posted on the internet about the horrors of the summer camp. Hundreds of people were all fearing for me and providing strength to the evil in the forest. John and the David monster had played me. They knew I would eventually run away in fear. It would help the others. They had forced me off the road. John had let me find my dead friend in the cabin, in the woods, and notify you all to help his master. I was crying as John told me all this. The fear, anguish, and rage came to a boiling point. I sobbed deeply, tearing at my hair and gnashing my teeth. I didn't hear John get loose. He hit me hard in the head and I rolled to the side. The weight of the heavy man was pressing on me before I knew what to do. But it had stopped moving. The hunting knife was hilt deep in John's abdomen. I had killed him. Fear once again took the helm, and I leapt up, sprinted to the door, and after looking both ways, crept through the house. I came to an empty kitchen with a door leading to the outside. Still in a daze, I slipped out. I could feel something pulling me to the forest, and I wasn't strong enough to resist. Something kept me going. I think I walked for days, but I can't be sure. Time had stopped being important. Eventually, I noticed that I was being followed by 3 tall, dark native people. My heart sank, and suddenly I was aware of the danger. I took off deeper into the forest. It wasn't a surprise to me when I came upon the cabin where the body of my friend rested. I was clearly being corralled and led by the evil in the forest. I couldn't fight anymore. He opened the passage, and I walked into the already lit cabin. The body of my dearest friend still lay in the corner. The laptop on the table was open, waiting for my final update. I felt the shadow rest a hand on my shoulder, and I cried for a while. The fake David had entered behind me and whispered soothing and loving words into my ear. I knew what my master wanted.